Okay, and we are live now on Facebook. It's a new experiment for us, so hopefully that this will go well. To anybody who's joining us on the internet, welcome to B'nai Shalom in West Orange, New Jersey. You are joined by about 30 or 35 people here in the room, and more still bringing in their lunches for this three-part session on Judaism in the New Testament. And I am Rabbi Robert Tobin, the rabbi of this place. What are our goals? Our goal is to understand how Judaism looks in the New Testament. Most of the people in this room, though not all, are Jewish, are in fact conservative Jewish. But we also have non-conservative Jewish and non-Jewish in the room. And certainly on the internet, anybody from God's creation may find themselves watching this. So the purpose of this lesson is not to accurately present Christianity. I have a background in Christianity. We could do that another day, but that is not the goal of this course. The goal of this course is to read the New Testament with Jewish eyes, with no interest in being converted to anything other than Jewish eyes, and to understand what does Judaism look like in the New Testament. The reason for this is really twofold. One idea is I think Jews don't read Christian Bible enough. I think Christians should be reading Jewish Bible, not as Old Testament, but as Jewish Bible. And I think Jews should read Christian Bible. Jews should read Quran. Jews should read the Book of Mormon. We are very enclosed into ourselves, I think because we have a history of feeling threatened by the outside world. And God forbid, if you found in your kid's bedroom a copy of the New Testament with highlighting throughout the book of Matthew, I think many Jewish parents would get very worried about that. The rabbi would get a call. What have we done wrong? That kind of thing. As opposed to let's understand each other and understand where some of the assumptions come from. So Judaism in the New Testament plays that role. The second thing is we need to understand Judaism is the what do you call it? The scientific experiment. You have something that makes sure everything else is the control. Thank you. Judaism is the control mechanism for the New Testament. What I mean by that is when you write a book and it purports to talk of historical times, real people in real places, and yet it's saying something revolutionary or edgy, you need to have a significant amount of stuff in it that everyone recognizes as true. Otherwise, the whole book won't be believed. So Judaism is the backdrop of the New Testament that lends credibility to the rest of the story from the point of view of the author or authors for the reader or readers. In other words, everybody knew Judaism. And most of the books of the Christian Bible are being written within 30 to 70 years of the life of the main figure, Jesus of Nazareth. So you have first-person eyewitness testimonies to this person's life, walking around and living in the land of Israel during a very traumatic and difficult time in Jewish history under Roman occupation. And the things that the authors in these books say about that situation have to ring true so that then the things they say their guy is trying to do might also be believed. If I start to write a book about somebody who's a critique of society in New York City, and I say, and he got on the subway at 96th Street, and he got off on the Upper East Side, nobody from New York is going to believe anything else I have to say because there's no subway that goes from 96th Street on the west side to the Upper East Side. It doesn't work that way, right? You need to know what the reality on the ground is so that the story itself falls into a believable context. So, in one sense, Judaism is the backdrop to the Christian stage. Okay? It's the context in which the actions happen. And so I'm interested in looking at how that context looks, much more really than the particulars of the Christian message. So we need to understand a little bit about Judaism at that time, and then we're going to go through a text study of one of the peak moments in the ministry of Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount, and we are going to look at that through a Jewish lens and see whether he's talking about our stuff or not our stuff, and how he's doing that, and how does that set things up. And then we're going to go from there to one of the stories of what's called the trial of Jesus, which is another major moment in the presentation of Judaism in relationship with Jesus in an antagonistic way. And we will hopefully be prepared to understand what's the believable and what's the problematic in that. So the goal for today is general background, Sermon on the Mount in light of Rabbinic Judaism, and then if we have time, the trial of Jesus. Otherwise, we'll pick that up. Moving forward, we're also going to talk about moving to the next generation, getting into Acts of the Apostles, letters to the Hebrews, Corinthians, and others, where the next generation of non-eyewitness testimony, that second level, is now going out into the larger world. And does it talk about Judaism in a different way if it's addressing Jewish or non-Jewish populations? And we'll start to see that. So that's kind of how the three lessons are going to run. It's going to be a little loose. Interrupt me if you have questions. If there's something I say that's confusing or you disagree with or something like that, fine. Throw your hand right up and I will repeat the question for the listening audience online, and then I'll answer to the best of my ability. The only thing I ask is that anyone understand that if we run into what seems to be a entrenched difference of opinion, that I'm the teacher, and I'll set the agenda for the remainder of the hour that we have together. So we're not going to get into prolonged dialogues between me and any one or two people, but if people have questions and we can move around the room and participate and allow me to keep moving in the direction I want, we'll do that. What's that? I don't care. You can have your cell phones on. Text your kids, do whatever you want. Also, I just want to say this is a lunch and learn, so anybody who wants to make arrangements in advance with Ellie in our cafe, you're certainly welcome to order your lunch for next week, and he'll have it ready for you when you get here. Okay, so he's happy to have people go in advance. Okay, so background. What is Judaism in the year 20 of the Common Era? Contrary to popular belief, there is no such thing as a year zero. There's no year zero because you can't have a year that's not a year. Scholarship tends to have the crucifixion of Jesus under the Romans happen when he's around 30, 32, 33, something like that. So let's say that those events are happening just for lazy shorthand in the year 30 because I like round numbers. And then you have 4 synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, who are apostles, immediate followers of Jesus during his life and death, who write books about their experience of him, quoting him at length in his sermons and teachings over time, and with very little kind of narrative that's not following him talking. Those are the synoptic gospels. And then you have other books of the New Testament. The one that's important for us will be Acts of the Apostles, but then you get on, there's letters to different nascent Christian communities, and then the book of Revelations, which we are going to ignore completely, because it's a mess. Right? What? It's a mess. We're going to ignore it completely. I can't be, it's interesting, but it's a whole different world for us to get into. Okay, so what's the background? First of all, the main question we need to ask is there such a thing as Judaism in the year 30? The answer to that is probably no. Huh? Rabbi, how can you say such a thing? That's because when you say Judaism, you mean a single religion that everybody who's a member of that group agrees upon that is the religion. It has books that are in, books that are out, practices that are in, practices that are out, leaders that are acknowledged, goals, theologies, beliefs held in common. The truth of the matter is that in the year 30, the Jewish people in the land of Israel were highly diverse and widespread. Beliefs were often at direct odds with each other between groups. The 4 main groups testified to by a historic source, Josephus, is that you have the Sadducees, you have the Pharisees, you have the Zealots, and you have the Essenes. These are the common 4 that people talk about. And for lack of time, let's just say Sadducees tend to be centered around the temple in Jerusalem and the sacrificial system. Pharisees tend to be what we would call the rabbis, who are the rabbis of the Mishnah, and the earlier rabbis whose work is the basis of what later becomes the Mishnah. You think of people like Rabbi Akiva, right? The famous rabbis of the martyrology on Yom Kippur, the schools of Hillel and Shammai. Those are the people who are coming out of what the New Testament calls Pharisees. We have Essenes, which we don't really know who they are, but they tend to be thought of as ascetics. Maybe they're the people down at Qumran in the Dead Sea. Maybe they're not, but they're separatists. They're not really in the political sphere in Jerusalem, and they die out after the destruction of the temple. And then the Essenes were not at Masada. The hold-off at Masada is later. Masada is originally actually King Herod's summer palace, but when Herod and the rest of it all falls apart, there's a group of Jewish rebels who hold out up there as squatters in Herod's old palace until several years after the destruction of the temple. Those are not Essenes. Then there are Zealots, which are political Jews who are trying to overthrow or rebel against Rome in force and secular manner. All of these people kind of show up in the New Testament, but for our purposes, Judaism, as we talk about it, is the Judaism of the rabbis. So in the year 20 of the Common Era, there were lots of Judaisms, plural, many different approaches to the covenant of our God through the Jewish people. Most of them acknowledged the temple and interacted with it. Some of them thought that was the whole show. Most of them interacted with Torah and knew that this was where the stories of our people and the laws of our people existed. Some of them thought that was the whole show. Most of them wanted to overthrow Rome. Some of them took up spears and swords to make it happen. All right? So most of them wanted the holy life. Some of them were extreme and separated from society to seek holiness through purity rituals. Those are the Essenes. So we have these different groups. They all overlap. It's not neat and tidy. E.P. Sanders wrote a book called Common Judaism. If you have trouble sleeping at night, I highly recommend it to you. It goes on for hundreds of pages documenting what were the practices of the people at this time that everyone really seems to have done. So, for example, everyone believed in the one God. Everyone believed in sacrifice as a form of relationship with the one God. Everyone believed that there were purity laws that maybe you should observe, and some people did, which meant going into mikveh and coming out of mikveh, not just for women celebrating the cycle of their fertility in life, but also for men and others coming into contact with impure objects or the powers of life and death or whatever, or people who make pilgrimage to Israel. They would go into the mikveh before they come up onto the Temple Mount. And in archaeology, we see evidence of all of these things being relatively widespread in the land of Israel. That's kind of common Judaism. Everyone would have observed the Passover sacrifice. Everyone would have observed the fall holiday of Sukkot as a pilgrimage holiday. That was, in fact, the biggest holiday for everybody was Sukkot. The holiday, the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles, if you've only lived in the English language world. And that's the fall harvest pilgrimage to Jerusalem. That was the big holiday. In the spring, Passover marks the beginning of the hope for a spring harvest. Sukkot is the ingathering of the actual fruit of the land that God's blessings have been given and complete at the end of the year. So that's kind of common Judaism. The Christian, yes? Was Jesus an Essene?
He had a lot of different practices.
Many people have gotten tenure at many universities staking their claim to what Jesus was in one of those four categories. The claim that he is a zealot is rejected within the text itself, because Simon the Zealot comes to him and tries to get him to rebel against Rome, and he rejects it, and he says, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and render unto the Lord that which is the Lord's, which is, pay your taxes and go to church kind of approach to things. The main argument seems to be between, we know that he's probably not a Sadducee, because there's no story where he brings a sacrifice anywhere in the New Testament, which makes sense because he winds up being the sacrifice in the New Testament. He is the sacrifice, the sin offering himself. He is, that's why they say, the Lamb of God. So he wouldn't be a Sadducee because he's not buying into that type of sacrificial system. So he's then going to either fit into one of these two categories, if we must, Essene or Pharisee. All right? Let's look at what I'm doing today, because I'm presenting him interacting with the Pharisaic system a lot. And I think that there's a lot more evidence that he's working within a Pharisee system than separating within an Essene system. But, we're open to it.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
When would you consider, or when is it considered that Judaism became a more coherent way of celebrating?
I think we could argue that Judaism today is still not a coherent
That's true.
way of celebrating anything.
That's what I said, more coherent. I suppose.
I personally believe that in every generation there have been many expressions of Judaism that run concurrent with each other, and the borders have always been blurred. I think that we can find that pluralism of Judaisms in every time. That's a historical lens that I wear, and I think it's easier as a conservative Jew than maybe in some other forms to do that. With the destruction of the temple in 70 AD and the absolute fiasco of the Bar Kokhba revolt around 130, all other hopes that are not Torah and synagogue based have been destroyed. So you really get a consolidation of what becomes Rabbinic Judaism, your Judaism, by the year 200 when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi finishes the Mishnah in Sipori,
So around 200.
which about 10 or 12 of you were there a week ago. A week ago today, we were standing in Sipori in the city of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and looking at this place where he lived. That's where the Judaism that we are, Reformed, Conservative, Orthodox, Reconstructionist, Secular Humanist, every form of Judaism today has its base literature as what came out of the Mishnah. Everything from that time. So that's really where there was a consolidation due to historical pain, right? And the destruction of other forms, and they didn't all survive. And then the tree kind of branches out again, and you get things like Kabbalah, you get mysticism, Chassidut, you get all kinds of stuff. But the tree came together in the trunk at the time of Mishnah. Okay? So that's the year 200. So we're going to back up 170 years before that and look at Judaism before it consolidated, before the temple was destroyed. Okay? Next step. What did a Jew in the year 20 need to be a Jew? Average Jew. What did you need? What did you do?
Circumcision?
So you needed circumcision. That's important. Talking about the boys, of course.
I don't know.
Circumcision as a sign of the covenant. So every boy would have been circumcised on the 8th day. Clear. No debate about that.
In all 4 sections.
Yes, every single one of these sects of Judaism would have had circumcision. There's no evidence that they didn't do circumcision, any of them. Even in the Qumran text and everything, you don't have people rebelling against circumcision. Ron. A Jewish father. It is entirely likely that Judaism at this time was patrilineal, not matrilineal. It's entirely possible. This isn't academic talking. Now I'm going to put my hat on as a rabbinic, conservative rabbi in sacred time and space. Of course it was matrilineal. We've always been matrilineal. How could you say such a thing? But we also have, lines and lineages, like the line of King David is man to man to man to man to man to man to man. Who are the women? Right? So it's most of the early stuff really did have a patrilineal religion. They also did not have formal conversion. Like you didn't have study with a rabbi for a year and then go through the following rituals, say the following prayers, and go to a Beit Din and we'll sign your certificate and now you can make Aliyah to Israel. We didn't have conversion. You converted by just doing Judaism, attaching yourself to the people and becoming one. And you might have been what's called a ger toshav, a resident alien or a resident stranger or something like that. But, people could have just come in. There weren't like these formal procedures. Yes?
Sacrifices.
Sacrifice was huge. So the sacrifices an average person would have would be on completion of an oath, right? I swear that I won't drink wine for the next 9 months, and please let my family be healthy and my flocks be prosperous. And on the conclusion of that 9 months, if I kept up my side, I'd bring a sacrifice back to the temple and thank God for all the blessings he's given me. Or if I've committed a crime in error or some breaking of a Torah law, I would have to bring a sacrifice of a sin offering to the temple in Jerusalem and have that animal sacrificed. Some of that meat goes to the priest to eat and be supported, and some of that comes back to me to support my family. I might have had something wonderful. I got my PhD or something, and I have a shlamim offering, a well-being offering, where it's a feast for the whole people. And then they had the formal ritual practices of the temple itself that the people didn't participate in. The Kohanim and priests did every single day, the daily olah offering, the burnt offering, and so forth. And these things were part of the maintenance of the universe. The temple's purpose was to keep the universe healthy. God's creation of the earth every day, ongoing in blessing and covenant, was a constant maintenance action by the priesthood in the temple in Jerusalem. So you have the kind of ritual cranking forward of the machine, personal engagement as atonement for things, and personal expression of the achievement of joys. All of that would have been recognized by sacrifice, meaning priests and Levites in the temple, and a pilgrim bringing that sacrifice there for them to slaughter it on your behalf. That would have been the main religion. Everybody knew that. Everybody bought into that. If something goes wrong, you fix it by admitting it, repairing the damage you've done, and bringing a sacrifice to the temple. That's how you got out of sin. What else?
The acceptance of the concept of one God.
Okay, the unity of God. There's no room in the Judaism at this time for polytheism. The Roman pantheon was pagan. Adopting the Roman pantheon would have been a sign of heresy. Setting up a statue of anything from the Roman pantheon would have been an affront to the Jewish nation. All of these things, of course, happened, right? But that was the dividing line. So recognizing the one God is the dividing line for being in or out, being a hopeless sinner or being one of the people. Okay? So yes, the one God. What else?
10 Commandments, accepting the 10 Commandments. Is that one?
There's very little evidence from this time period that the 10 Commandments were held up above any of the other commandments. I think all the commandments were in play. All 613 mattered because you had the land and you had the temple, so you can do everything. They wouldn't have said, peel off these 10. These are the biggest ethical commandments that we all have in common, and then we'll argue about shatnas and the weaving of stuff in our clothes on another day. We talk about 10 commandments as a way to elevate them above the others. And I think that that's actually a move that is made possible by some of the Christian view that we may see this afternoon and in the next 2 weeks, that maybe there are high commandments and low commandments, moral commandments and ritual commandments. The Judaism of this time would not have accepted as normal a separation between ritual and moral, high or low commandments. Okay? Yes. What's that? Shabbat. Absolutely. Shabbat was a core expression of the Jewish religion. Its observance, not doing commerce on that day. The temple is closed to public stuff, except for the commanded things on that day. Not going out and doing agriculture on that day. Not doing pilgrimage on that day. Would there have been wagons on the roads? Sure. Just like you go to Jerusalem today and you see cars on the road. There are people driving. That doesn't mean the religion says it. Right? The religion would have been clear that Shabbat was a day of rest, a day of cessation of labor, a day not for commerce. And that would have been common Judaism at the time. Yes, Stan.
Wasn't there some evidence that the Jews at that time observed the form of kashrus?
Yes,
Absolutely, they kept kosher. They weren't, holding lettuce leaves up to lamps. And they probably did not have separate pots and pans and dishes, except for maybe the stew pot for meat or something like that. But remember, at this time, the way you cooked was everything went in the pot, and the way you ate is you dumped it on the table. And maybe everybody had a knife. right? Where you would have your knife to cut things off the middle or out of the bowl and feed yourself. So the idea that you've got, Corningware for dairy and Corningware for meat, and you've got separate drawers and flatware for 20 in each, not to mention Pesach and all of that, these are first world modern problems when it comes to kashrut. They would have followed Leviticus 11 faithfully. No shellfish, none of the animals that are off the list. A meat animal like a cow would require shechita, a very clear way of cutting the windpipe and the larynx. That's testified to. That the temple form of killing would have been the way anyone would have had killed for meat. They were allowed to kill for meat in all of their dwelling places, but they were only allowed to kill for sacrifice in Jerusalem, with the sole exception of one sacrifice. Anyone got it? The Korban Pesach. The Passover sacrifice was done in homes by people all around the country. So Passover, while it is a pilgrimage holiday, is not really commanded as a pilgrimage holiday for that sacrifice on the 14th of Nisan. You had to come at some point during the week, but that sacrifice would have been done at home. That was not a pilgrimage holiday for that sacrifice. The Korban Pesach was done everywhere. That's because you ate it. The Korban Pesach was meant to be eaten, so it was killing in your home for food. Yeah.
Belief in the Messiah.
Belief in a Messiah would have been one of the sectarian beliefs. Not everyone believed in a Messiah. Remember, there's still a king in Jerusalem, though it's Herod, and he's problematic, and the Romans put him there, and most of us don't like him. To say that there's going to be another guy who's king on the throne would have been a really fast way to get in trouble. Right? Really fast way to get in trouble. And that's part of the Jesus narrative. Are you the king Messiah? Are you not the king Messiah? And the mocking above his head on the cross, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, or you may see the Latin INRI in some iconography, and the Roman soldier, nobody would have put it up in Latin above him. So if you see INRI, that's an anachronism going in. But the idea that they would mock him as the King of the Jews plays into the question of, was he a threat to the political order? Was his execution by the Romans because he was a political threat, and therefore here is your king, here is your revolutionary, dead on the cross? This is what happens to these kinds of people. Or is there rabbinic messianism going on here? There's really, in the Mishnah, there's no rabbinic messianism. In the first 2 centuries of the Common Era, you don't have a lot of talk of Messiah. In the Talmud and the Midrash and in the later generations, we get a lot of it, and it really takes off. But in the land of Israel at this time, they wanted redemption, they wanted empowerment, but they had the temple. That wasn't the focus. Which wasn't really a messianic religion. Now, many of the Qumran sects talk about a Messiah figure. Some of the apocalyptic things talk about a Messiah figure. Christianity ties into the idea of a Messiah figure. So the idea is known, but I wouldn't say that it's common Judaism. Right? Not everybody would have bought into that. It was more in the apocalyptic fringes of trying to get the world back the way that maybe an intrusion from God would make it be. So it wasn't universal belief at that time. Yes? Okay, study of Torah and transmission to the next generation. The early rabbinic system is based in that concept. And the Torah had been transmitted all these generations through the period of the Second Temple, as is testified to by Qumran and all of the things we found down there in a very eclectic library that doesn't seem to be a pious rabbinic center by any means. So general literature of Torah being taught, studied, copied, passed on widely throughout society, I think is testified to. In addition to that, we have the Theodosius stone from the down below Robinson's Arch, which is now at the Rockefeller Museum on the eastern side of Shar Shechem, the Damascus Gate. You can go and visit it, which is a Greek inscription found at the base of the Temple Mount that testifies to a synagogus, and that is being funded by an arch-synagogus, who you would call the synagogue president, who is the son of an arch-synagogus, the son of an arch-synagogus. So he's a third generation in this role from the time of the destruction in the year 70. And it says that this place is being established for the study of the Torah and for helping wayfarers or pilgrims as they come to Jerusalem. So concurrent with the sacrifices up on top of the hill, there was at least a youth hostel, a Beit Midrash, a synagogue, a study center that was endowed with money and support for the purpose of studying Torah for pilgrims and probably those who lived in the city. So we know that at the same time as the temple, we had synagogues, and at the same time as the temple, in synagogues there was Torah study. In addition, at this time, we have Gamla, we have Masada, and a couple of other early synagogue archaeological sites which were up and running at the time of the Second Temple. So don't fall into the temple was destroyed and then Judaism became synagogues. That's a myth. The archaeology does not support that. There were synagogues and temple at the same time. The temple is destroyed. The synagogue continues and thereby by default becomes normal Judaism. Okay? So yes, transmission of Torah to the next generation. Whether that was a sectarian focus is an open question. The Pharisees cared a lot about that. We don't know if the Sadducees gave two hoots about it as long as you were bringing your sacrifices to the priests. Right? We don't know. And the Essenes, they had their own literature. If Dead Sea is them, then their literature was wild. If the Dead Sea Library is just a dumping ground, then we have no idea what the Essenes were really teaching. Okay? What else? Background Judaism at this time. The only thing you're really missing is holidays. They observed holidays. So they had these agricultural holidays. Passover for the spring, Shavuot for the Feast of Weeks at the end of the barley harvest and the bringing of the first fruits. And then you have the long, dry, horrible, slow death of summer, where all the hills go from green to brown, except for the sturdy trees, which are harvested then in the fall, and they give you life through the winter ahead and the fall holiday. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, not so sure. They were there, they're in the Torah, but they're not pilgrimage holidays. You're not commanded to go and to hear the shofar blown in Jerusalem. You're not commanded to go and appear while the high priest does the sacrifice of atonement for the people. Those are not pilgrimage holidays. It says you shall observe these holidays, but it doesn't say you shall go and do them. You shall appear in Jerusalem, all the males among you shall appear in Jerusalem with the blessings of God in your hands as sacrifice on 3 times. That's Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Those are the holidays. Okay? We do have evidence, by the way, that Tisha B'Av was observed during the Second Temple. People fasted when there was a Second Temple for the destruction of the First Temple. So the people who try and tell you, now that we have Jerusalem back, we don't need to fast anymore on Tisha B'Av, what do you say to them? We had the temple and we fasted on Tisha B'Av, right? So, it doesn't really work. Yeah.
When did Bar Mitzvah start?
Bar Mitzvah starts around the time of the Mishnah. You have the concept in I forget which chapter, but it says that 13 is the age of mitzvot, and it follows the age of Chumash and Torah study and Talmud. So, yes, at this time, we understand that a 13-year-old male is obligated to the mitzvot. Whether or not they had a ceremony and they danced him on a chair and, got him special kippot and a theme, I don't know. But as far as the concept of being a responsible adult who can read from the Torah and have an education, that was already here at this time. Remember, at 15, they would have gotten married. 15, 16, 17, they're married, they've got kids. So they only live to 40. On average. I mean, you can live to 80, 120, but if you got sick, you died. Yeah.
What was the role of the woman at this time? Did the woman have rights?
We only see peripheral evidence of women in the texts. That doesn't mean that women were peripheral. So since we're dealing with a literary legacy, the bias of the text as a male written document to groups of males studying the document, empowered in society that is a male-driven society, we wind up with a lot of silence and a lot of guesswork. We do also have innovations at this time to protect women in Rabbinic Judaism, like the ketubah, for example, the wedding document, which empowers the woman to have money of her own, whether she's in or outside of the marriage, and puts her in front of all of his other business dealings and all that kind of stuff. Women could be property owners. They could appear in court. In some cases, their testimony was acceptable, especially in women's status issues, like my husband's dead. A woman was permitted to testify that way and be believed, so she could remarry, but it was limited. We shouldn't go too far and pie in the sky as far as equality and women's rights at that time. Okay, so that's the background. Okay? Now let's narrow in and let's talk about rabbinic Judaism, because that's Judaism. And this is going to become the real Rock'em Sock'em Robots opponent for Jesus. When Jesus wants to pick a fight, he's picking the Pharisees. Pharisees means rabbis. The rabbis of the Mishnah. Our ancestors, our sacred ancestors, whom could do no wrong, right? This is the focus of his ire in a lot of ways. So, you have to ask yourself a question that I'm not going to answer for you now. Who do you spend the most time complaining about? If you're a Democrat, do you spend all your time complaining about Trump, or do you spend your time complaining about Democrats? Right? Nowadays, it's all Trump. But if you want to be productive, you might want to talk about your own house, right? And argue with your own people about your own leadership and your own values and your own direction and where you think things should go, and if you want to be a part of that. So the question is, when Jesus fights with the Pharisees, is he fighting from the outside and he's making them into a straw man that he can beat up? Or is he fighting from the inside because this is the system that he thinks is the valid system, but he has honest to goodness arguments with it, right? And that's something that only you can answer for yourselves. Jesus is not in the Mishnah in any way. Jesus is in the Talmud, and many of those passages are now being rewritten back in, because up until the 8th century in Babylonia, you could say all kinds of vile and wondrous things about Jesus and whether or not his mother was a virgin, for example, and all kinds of just hacking at him, insulting stuff, because you're not living in a Christian world that's empowered. But if you're living under Christian Rome, that stuff gets dropped from the Talmud real quick, right? Or it gets rewritten, or it gets edited, or it gets blacked out, and all kinds of things. So there is Jesus stuff in the Talmud. None of it's favorable, but he was known to have existed. And whether the scholarly argument is, are the rabbis of the Talmud reading Jesus through the church, or reading Jesus from having had ancestors who had interactions with him? Is it a direct line or an indirect line? They're probably reading through the church, right? Okay, so let's dive in. I'm going to pass something out. This is, I don't think there's enough for everybody, so if you're next to someone who brushed their teeth, share. And if not, quietly take your own copy. Just kidding. But we may want to share every other, or take one if you aren't. So if you're here as a pair, share. If you're here on your own, take your own copy. Okay? This is the Sermon on the Mount. This is Matthew chapter 5. For those of you who are on the trip, this is taking place outside of Capernaum, on the hills overlooking the Sea of Galilee, the Kinneret. And there's a Mount of the Beatitudes up there now, which is a lovely setting where pilgrims go. Oh, it's not in the Torah. It's only in the handout. Okay, so chapter 5 at the beginning of the handout, I have a slightly different translation. We are going to read this. By the way, the class is going to go to 1:30. Everyone good with that? That the schedule is 1:30. Okay, so we're going to read this, and we're going to try and make our way through it, and maybe I'll jot down here on the backdrop, if somebody can find me in the desk over there, markers. Leslie, can you see if you got some dry erase markers back there in the desk? Or on the board? Yeah, just bring me the... And I'll keep track of the Jewish themes. As we read, I want you to shout out if there's something that you think is in the Torah. Okay? So, at the point of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus has already done many things to get people's attention, and he's starting to get a following. Sermon on the Mount. Okay? So now he's drawing crowds. Before this, he was just meeting with his followers in little places, but now he's drawing a crowd. He's working up in the north, outside of Tiberias, on the northwest side of the Sea of Galilee, rolling hills, lots of Jewish towns, Lots of synagogues are in the archaeological record from here. The communities are cosmopolitan in nature. There are Romans there. There are different kinds of people, foreigners there, as well as Jews who are there. And there are faith healers, and there are people who come for all kinds of spiritual things, casting out of demons or all kinds of things, because the hot springs by Tiberias some of them have salt components, some of them don't have salt components. There's the freshwater sea, which is miraculous in that area. There's really no large standing bodies of fresh water in the land of Israel before the JNF started building reservoirs, right? So this is a miraculous area in the Holy Land. And so people would have made pilgrimage there for healing, for spiritual healing, for all kinds of things. And in that milieu, Jesus of Nazareth would have been one of many people making their living as an itinerant preacher and healer in this area. That would not have been a startling thing for him to claim to be. People in this area would have known others who claimed similar abilities when he got started. Yeah.
What was his beef against the Sanhedrin or the rabbis?
We'll get there. Okay, I'm going to hold off his beef with the Sanhedrin and the rabbis until we get a little farther in, because the question is going to be a horse and a cart. What comes first? Does he do things that make the Sanhedrin mad, or does the Sanhedrin do things that make him mad? Right? Who's ticking off who here? And the truth of the matter is it takes two to tango. So we're going to hear what some of his teachings are first. You should know that in Christianity, by the way, if there are Christians present and I say something that's off the mark or something, please participate, right? Please jump out of your seat and shout, "Rabbi, you're going to hell." And I'll save you a seat. No, but if there's something that's corrective in nature that needs to be done, please, or another interpretation or something, bring it and allow the group to benefit. I mean it. Okay, so the Sermon on the Mount, yes?
You know his age?
At this point, he's in his 20s.
20s?
He's in his 20s. Let's say he's 21, 24, 25, something like that, when his ministry gets rolling. So what happens in Capernaum and the other places is that he comes and he establishes himself, as we'll see probably next session, but then he also does some miracle healings in public, right? It's not like he took the person into the back room and the person came out and threw their crutches down. He's in front of crowds of people, according to the text, and that's where these things are happening, and so that's causing a buzz, right? So there's a buzz in the community. Now, this is the Christian portrayal. What happened? I don't know. I wasn't there. The Christian portrayal is that his ministry gets going, several public miracles, and now the crowds begin to gather. When the crowds gather, he goes up on the mount and he gives this most enlightened of speeches. And this is, for many Christians, this is the heartfelt speech. This is the sermon among everything else that happens in Jesus' life. This is what they love him for, right? The stuff that's in here is the guide to the repaired world, the redeemed society, salvation, love of God and Jesus and everything. This is the unquestionable good in the New Testament for the faithful Christian. Okay? As Jews, when we read it, we may or may not have that same reaction. Okay? So let's dive in. Why don't I have you guys read a couple sentences at a time? Want to start? Who wants to read first?
I will.
Francesca, nice and loud.
Okay. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him.
Okay, so Pirkei Avot, written from the rabbis who inherit this generation in Rabbinic Judaism, say you should sit at the feet of scholars, and you should drink up their words. Okay? So the mode of teaching here is rabbinic mode. Okay? Normal. Again, what's the purpose of presenting Jewish imagery? What's that?
Relation to the existing belief system.
Right. It's coming out of the known, the accepted system. So we're going to validate. It's bias validation, or whatever it's called. Positive bias validation. What's it called? I got the words right in the wrong order. Validation bias. It's when you hear what you want to hear. Right? And so now you think you've heard a proof. right? You have a bias and you easily validate it. So these things are being used as bias validation, right? He's a teacher, he's a rabbi.
He was also preaching to Jews.
And he's preaching, it says multitudes. So we're not sure. This might be where he steps out of that bubble. Could be. We don't know. They're multitudes. All right? Now, 2. Go on, Francesca.
He opened his mouth and began to teach them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Pause. That's lovely. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It just sounds nice, right? I mean, the poor in spirit, they really, it's about time. They really have it coming to them. But he's added in another theme. He immediately puts in a theological theme. What is it?
Kingdom of heaven.
The kingdom of heaven. Is that a Jewish concept?
In the Pirkei Avot, isn't that the first thing? It says there's room for everybody.
Well, in the Mishnah, we have many references to the Olam Haba, the world to come. Would a Jew hearing this have thought that he's referring to the kingdom of heaven that we receive after we die? Remember, the Pharisees are the group of people who believe in resurrection of the righteous dead. Other Jewish groups don't necessarily believe that you get another shot at life. The rabbinic system at this time believed that after you die, you get to live again if you were good. That was one of the core beliefs that separated them off from other people. The fact that that was resurrection of the dead is obviously a theme that the Jesus narrative is going to have something to say about.
Well,
Right?
Isn't that the job of the Messiah?
Well, remember, you stop with the Messiah stuff. We've already said we're not sure that everyone believed in Messiah. So you'd say, we don't want to take what we believe now and put it back on them then. Okay, we just want to read them on their own terms. Yeah.
So it's all of Israel has
All right. So Mishnah 10:1 in Sanhedrin says that all Israel has a place in the world to come, except for the no goodniks that it then names. Right? So the idea there is that there's a judgment where the bar is in that Mishnah seems to be really high, like Menashe made the blood of the innocent flow in the streets of Jerusalem up to people's knees, and he doesn't get in, so maybe if it's only the ankles, you might get in. There is a judgment. So the idea there's a world to come and a judgment. A Jew at this time have heard that when Jesus says this, Blessed are the meek or the poor in spirit, for they shall inherit the kingdom of heaven. They'd be listening. It's a little off, right? Sounds really lovely, and it ties into something that I think I believe, but wait a minute, what's that kingdom of heaven thing? Bruce?
I think, and I might be wrong, but I'll throw it out. You have to look at Jesus in the context of the time that he is doing his ministry.
Absolutely.
And if you look
I'll
at-
repeat it.
If you look at that, some of this stuff is pure Judaism, or the teachings of the time, but repackaged.
Yeah.
So the kingdom of heaven, in a sense, could be a sort of a repackaging of a thought, but slightly different.
Okay.
One of the things that I use sometimes when I talk to people is about the golden rule, which is, do unto others that you would want to do them to do unto you. And Hillel sort of had a mantra. So Hillel's
Okay, hang on, time out. We're going there. But you're giving summary conclusions that we should do at the end of session 3. Okay? So you're solving problems I haven't raised yet. It's good. It's good, Bruce. It's good. But you're gonna give away the shop for free here. All right? I'm going there too. I agree with you. But let's let it play out. Let the process work a little, okay? Judy, and then I'll get back to the text.
Was he speaking to them in biblical Hebrew? Or in
No,
Aramaic?
he's almost certainly speaking to them in Aramaic. An outsider possibility is Greek. Greek would have been the language of the educated in this area, and the Jewish inscriptions in this area are often in Greek. Okay, as we saw in the synagogues in Hamat Tavarius and Capernaum, we're seeing Greek inscriptions there from the Jewish population. Greek was the language of Rome. in this time and place, not Latin. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
One of the things that I see is this balancing of what part of the sentence is here.
Yeah.
And there's the balancing of the sentence, which is biblical.
Okay. Yes. So she says there's a biblical parallelism structure here, which is the sentences are in two parts. There's a this and there's a that. Happy are those who dwell in your house. Happy are those whose God is the Lord. This and that. You have, and that's classic biblical sing-song. So yes, he's in rabbinic mode and he's in biblical tone. That's really important. He's speaking in biblical tone. Okay? So he's got their attention. This is a great opener because it resonates with people, but they don't really understand, and it sounds lovely, so it's attractive. Okay? So this is great. This guy's really good at what he does. Right? All right, next. Go on.
Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted.
We all like that, right? Mourners should be comforted. That's good.
The Bible.
When we were the time of after the death, when we were observing all of the things that we classically observe now, so wouldn't that be their comfort? It's not saying how they're comforted.
Right. So he would have known Shiva, and he would have known what's called Nichum Avelin, which is a formal process of comforting mourners. And they knew certainly well the line from Isaiah, and the days of your mourning shall come to an end, that religion brings comfort to mourners, and those days come to an end. And Isaiah certainly is a figure who talks about redemption and all those kinds of things. So this is again resonating with this kind of bigger picture. The question is, what makes a mourner blessed? That's the new piece. So this resonance of the word blessed are they and blessed are they, that's new. In Rabbinic Judaism, who is blessed? Just God. Baruch hu et Adonai hamavorach. Blessed is God who is blessed. Right? To talk about people as being blessed is already, again, it's going to be a little off. And now he's saying that the meek are blessed and mourners are blessed, so they have our immediate empathy. So our empathy is being spoken to in categories of holiness. That's really interesting. Holiness and empathy are getting tied up together. What's holiness for the Jew at this time? Shabbos, temple, Torah, and purity laws. That's the path to holiness. Empathy isn't really the primary category for holiness. Dedication, sanctity, separateness, observance, divinity. These are categories of holiness. We do have holiness associated with tzedakah and righteousness and humility. But the idea of empathy, this guy, he's saying stuff that people are going to find as new. Okay? It's new. Speaking to them in ways that they recognize, but there's newness here. Okay? Next.
Blessed are I said that one. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for the righteousness.
We skipped 5.
Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth.
Now, in an age of Rome, that's a really attractive idea. Right? Blessed are the meek or the gentle, they shall inherit the earth. Right? As long as that's not a metaphor for the grave, that's fine. Right? And it's not. As they shall. So now he's got inheriting the earth, they shall be comforted, and the kingdom of heaven. So he's offering stuff. Right? He's a salesman too. He's got a product. He's got something he's putting on the table that they're not used to hearing. Okay? Fair? Everyone see that? Okay, so he's using our mode, but he's doing something different. All right, go on.
Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied.
Okay, hunger and thirst for righteousness. What's the word for righteousness in Rabbinic Judaism?
Tzedakah.
Tzedakah and tzedek. Okay, and that would have been tzedek, tzedek tirdof. Justice, justice you shall pursue from the Torah. Okay, so that's going to resonate. But not only the pursuit of it, it'll be fulfilled. So again, he's making a promise here. All of your struggling will not be in vain. All right? So this is going to really, especially the disaffected, the poor, the downtrodden, the frustrated, these people are going to be hearing this. If you do something bad, that's how God will get you. If you do something good, that's how God will bless you. Right? Pharaoh drowned the boys in the Nile. Pharaoh was drowned in the Nile. Right? There's a lot of that in the Torah. Okay. Going on.
Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God.
Very interesting. The pure in heart shall see God. Now, in Pirkei Avot, we have a question. What is the good life unto which a person should cleave? And the 5 famous students each have a different answer. A good eye, right? A good neighbor, a good friend, a good name is in there in Pirkei Avot, and a lev tov, a good heart, right? And I like that answer best is the answer because his is included in all of the others, the lev tov. So this is resonating as well with Mishnah age, Tannaitic, early rabbinic aphorisms that are already starting to crop up here. Yeah.
But no one has seen God since Moses.
And that's the tweak. That's the twist. That's right. It's like it sounds like us, it draws us in, and then right? And that's the difference. So he's not building a message. I mean, look, if everything he said is what we believe, he'd be in the Mishnah. He's saying different stuff so he gets his own religion. Right? At the end of the day, we already know the conclusion. What he teaches isn't going to work. Not for us. Right? He's going to be outside looking in by the time he's done. But he doesn't start that way. He starts on the inside looking in. And he winds up on the outside looking in. And so we're going to look at that as we move forward here. We're just seeing hints of it. I mean, the beginning here is lovely. I mean, this is a great warm-up. There's really very little controversial here, and there's a lot that's attractive and a lot that's piquing my curiosity, right? I'm now getting comfortable. You know what? I'm texting my wife. I'm going to stay for the rest of the lecture, right? I'll be home late. Okay? What else? Okay, next.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God.
Okay, blessed are the peacemakers, right? You shall pursue peace. You should be like the sons of Aaron, lovers of peace, pursuers of peace, and so on. Like, that's big. But to call them B'nai Elohim is that's at this point, somebody in the room with a kippah on their head just went harumph. Right? Like, oh, huh? What did he say? Sons of God? What? Right? Because we are sons of man. Right? That's a known prophetic category. Many of the prophets say, what do I desire you, O son of man? Right? You, O mortal. Right? That kind of language, that you're a ben Adam, that you're a person. But to call you B'nai Elohim, those are seraphim and ophanim and chayot HaKodesh. Those are the angelic or supernal beasts that serve God on high. They would be B'nai Elohim at best. So this is already, whoa, something just happened. Okay? A ripple goes through the crowd. Keep reading.
Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Okay? So, the moment he has done something that's going to make someone zip back at him, he affirms that getting zipped by people is a path to righteousness. Right? First big controversial thing he said is that people get to be B'nai Elohim somehow. And the next thing he says is, and if you get persecuted for your belief, you will gain righteousness. Right? Yes.
Not in seeing God is very alien to Jewish thought. I mean, God tells Moses that no man can see me, not even Moses.
And he hides him in the cleft of the rock and puts his hand over the rock, and Moses only sees his back. But in the end of Deuteronomy, it says there's nobody like Moses who saw God panim el panim, face to face. So the Torah says he saw him face to face, although Exodus, when he goes by, says he hit him in the cleft of the rock. So we have conflicting stories in the Torah. So the idea of seeing God's face would certainly be something you would want. Now, in Christian church mode here, the joke's on them, because Jesus is God. So they're looking at his face. They just don't know it in their mode, right? I mean, there's a little snicker here. He's like, gotcha, right? Sorry, I inject inappropriate personality sometimes into text because I find it funny. For the Jew listening, yeah, that's a problem. That's like the kingdom of heaven thing, the blessing of the people thing. There's a lot going on here that's not really jiving with my small o orthodox understanding of things, right? Seeing God would have also made me go a little nutty. So at this point, I'm starting to squirm. As a rabbinic Jew in the crowd, I'm starting to squirm. I assure you my squirming has just begun. Okay, so here we go. 11.
Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me.
Huh.
Well,
Did your text capitalize the M in me?
yes.
Remember, in Greek, like Hebrew, there are no capital letters. So that's an English editorial insertion to make the me the divine capital M. Right? All right. So now he's claiming some level of what?
Separateness.
Holiness, separateness, divinity, all tied together in the Jewish imagination, because we expected him to say, blessed are you when men cast insults at you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you on account of God. That's what we're looking for there. The Jew will be very happy if he just puts the word God there. And again, the joke's on them, because in the Christian church mode, this isn't just a guy. This is Father, Son, Holy Ghost, one Trinity, all together, and da-da-da-da, right? So he can do that if that's what he's doing. If he's just a guy, then there's something else going on here. And he's really placing himself as a divinity, a really charismatic leader, right? So don't be afraid if they persecute you on account of me. So I'm going to talk to all you people who are in my class today. If you leave this room and people persecute you on account of me, you should know it's okay, because you will see God and gain the kingdom of heaven. You will be blessed and righteous for the persecution that you will bear in staying faithful to the teachings that I, Rabbi Tobin, am teaching you today. You all laughed at me right away, right? So that's what he just did. Now, his ministry hasn't been going real long. The crowds are just forming, and this is what he hits them with. Okay? So he is now in a different mode. This moment is where the mode shifts. And he's no longer a normal rabbi. He's no longer a normal prophet, because no prophet in Israel ever said, you will be persecuted on account of me. The prophets all said, I will be persecuted because of you. Right? Nobody ever turned that. So that's the new. And if you want to come down to the essence of the argument between Jesus and rabbis and everything else, the role of Jesus as the gateway to what Judaism offers Jews is the problem. We don't have that gateway. We don't need that gateway. We don't want that gateway. We're offended by the gateway, right? As opposed to the gateway is the essence of the message, which is the Christian belief. The gateway is the essence of the message. And we're like, gateway? I got the Torah. I got the temple, right? I've got my sacrifices. I don't need a gateway. All right, so this is where it creeps in. Okay, next, rejoice.
Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you.
Okay, so now we know he knows Midrash. Okay? Because there are many midrashim at this time that talk about the martyrology of the prophets. So, example, the book of Isaiah doesn't have Isaiah getting killed. But we have a thing called the Ascension of Isaiah, which is an early rabbinic, proto-rabbinic exegesis or midrash of Isaiah being martyred. And that story gets picked up as an Aggadah in the Talmud later. But we have earlier evidence of it. So we have multiple midrashim here that there's an idea that the prophets were all martyred because of the disbelief of the people. That's a common Jewish non-Torah belief at this time. Obviously, that's going to become the narrative for the church with the crucifixion and the crowds and the Jews and all this kind of stuff. Okay? So he's already throwing that in there as well. Next.
So now we're in the section disciples in the world.
All right, we can move on. The one thing I do want to see here is verse 16.
Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven.
Okay, so he enters in the idea of Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father who art in heaven, Jewish phrase. It becomes the essence of one of the most famous Christian prayers, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, and so on. Apostles' Creed, Knights' Creed, Catholic insertion, whatever, trespasses or sins, they've got their own squabbles. But the idea of praying to our Father who art in heaven is core here. And we maintain it even with the prayer for Israel today. Avinu Shebashamayim Sur Yisrael V'go Alo. Barechet Midinai Yisrael. Stan.
It struck me that all the Beatitudes, all 12 of the first ones, refer to can be read as referring to the afterlife.
Yes.
The kingdom of heaven, seeing God because of me.
Stan says that all of the Beatitudes can be read as the reward being the kingdom of heaven and seeing God in an afterlife. Absolutely. And obviously the church is going to run with that. The question is the Jew listening to him at this time primed to hear that as afterlife talk? Or is that this world, the kingdom of heaven, is when Rome gets their boot off our neck? Right? And which is the kingdom of heaven? Right? And I think that the kingdom of heaven in the ideal world for most Jews at this time would have been here now. The just society being redeemed and returning through tshuva to the proper world with a real king of David on the throne, and no infighting, and Rome is gone and all of that. But this is a theological message. This does not ring as a political text. So again, it's taking the categories that the people would have been primed to hear, and it's turning them. So they're hearing and they're curious and they're being told something different. Okay? All right. Now, verse 17. Let's get a new reader. Who wants to read next? Bonnie, you want to pick it up?
Do not think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill.
Oh, phew. I'm glad we got that settled. Okay? So why is that important? Because you got people squirming in their seats already. They're already starting to have problems with a couple of the things he said. But he hasn't really contradicted Torah yet. Okay, so he's saying, don't worry, I hear the hubbubs in the crowd. I'm not here to abolish the Torah. By the way, the law, all these Christian translations say the law. That is the Torah. The word Torah means law. And when they say the law, they mean the Torah. The 5 books of Moses as you have them today. Someone had a hand up. No? Okay.
We did not come to abolish the Obamacare. We only want to make it work.
I'm going to pretend Phyllis did not say anything about Obamacare and the Senate. All right, so he didn't come to abolish, he came to fulfill. What does that mean? See, here's the rub. Yeah?
Is he saying that the people who have been in charge are not doing their job?
He could be critiquing society, that the Torah lies in front of us unfulfilled, and we need to fulfill it. So I'm addressing a wrong in the society around me, perhaps. And he doesn't say we need to fulfill it. He says he's here to fulfill it. What's another possibility? Yep.
He's trying to ensure that he's really not radical and trying to promote the Torah and fulfill it.
Right.
He's not attacking it.
A few years ago, well-meaning Orthodox people who wanted to non-judgmentally differentiate themselves credibly in the Jewish spectrum started using the language of Torah Judaism. right? We are Torah Jews. You know, the Torah Jewish community is this and the Torah Jewish community is that, which of course didn't work because the Reform and Conservatives also see themselves as Torah Jews and Torah Judaism. And so it was like, you know, but he's trying to say things that are assuring. I'm a Torah Jew. I believe in the Torah. I believe in the prophets. I didn't come to overturn them. I'm not a radical. I'm not a revolutionary. Ease down back there. I didn't come to overturn it. I come to fulfill it. Now, if I tell you my purpose is to fulfill the words of the Torah, what do you hear? Rabbi Tobin just said, I'm here to fulfill the words of the Torah. What do you think that means? What?
Got a messianic
I've got a Messiah complex. Hopefully not. Honestly, what would that ring like? If I stood in the pulpit and said, my job is to fulfill the words of the Torah, to do the mitzvot, to do the commandments, to lead a righteous life, to be a moral, ethical Jew according to the standards of the Torah. If I say my job is not to overturn the Torah, but to fulfill it, that's what every single person in the room is going to hear. The question is that what he meant? Which parts of the Torah is he here to fulfill? If he's here to fulfill a piece of Isaiah that talks about the coming of a king, that's very different than if he's talking about keeping a nice Shomer Shabbos house. Right? Okay.
But truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the law until all is accomplished.
Beautiful. That's just rabbinic Judaism. You shall neither add nor detract from that which is written. The one Torah. Eternal and perfect. Great. But he didn't stop there. Go on.
19. Whoever then annuls one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever keeps and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven.
Okay. So whoever does the tiniest of mitzvahs, it's like you did all the mitzvahs. And whoever breaks the tiniest of mitzvahs, it's like you broke all the mitzvahs. Right? You do one thing with a whole heart, you get the kingdom of heaven. You do it the other way, you get whatever else. Right? That's great. That's got a lot of resonance. You know, the Pirkei Avot. Again, you don't say that one mitzvah is bigger or smaller than another because the reward of a mitzvah could be one or the other and you don't know. Instead, you should run to do the will of your maker and make his will your will, and so on. It's Pirkei Avot. He knows the teachings that become Pirkei Avot. They're all over this text. Okay? So I have to make an argument that's either common Judaism or he's a Pharisee or living within the Pharisaic world of conversation and imagery because he's using our texts. Yeah.
What do the asterisks mean?
I don't know. I didn't print it. Debbie, where'd you get it from?
I got it offline.
Okay. I don't know. I have a different translation in front of me. Okay, accept 20, Bonnie.
For I say to you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven.
Okay, that's a double entendre because we know what he's about to do to the Pharisees and the scribes in the rest of this chapter. But he says your righteousness has to be greater than that of the Pharisees and the scribes, or you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. So at this point, does he want Jews to do the mitzvot? Is he here to do the mitzvot? Is he here to teach anything that contradicts the mitzvot?
No.
Absolutely not. And what happens to someone who does contradict any piece of the Torah? They don't get the kingdom of heaven. That's what he says. Let's move on.
You have heard that the agents were told you shall not commit murder, and whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court.
We've got that. That's Torah. You shall not kill. Whoever dies under the hand of man, he shall be killed. Mot yumat.
But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court, and whoever says to his brother, you good for nothing, shall be guilty before the Supreme Court, and whoever says, you fool, shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell.
Hello. I was, in the background you got something, peanuts, cotton candy. Go ahead, he's talking about fiery hell. He really just changed the whole conversation. So what happened? He just said he's not going to change anything in the Torah, and then he quotes Torah, a law that we all know, we all agree, whoever commits murder, he shall be killed, regardless of modern feelings about capital punishment. Forget it. Torah times, there are no prisons. Death, right? That's the punishment. And then he says, what? You have been told that whoever commits murder shall be killed? You've been told by who? Moses, Torah, God. Those are all correct answers. But I say to you, hello. You hear the tone? He is taking upon himself an authority superior to God, Torah, and Moses. You have been told by God. But I say to you, now it's not a problem here because he's making it more restrictive, right? He's not overturning the law of murder, right? He's saying you don't have to commit murder to deserve punishment. If you're even angry in your heart, you get punishment. If you say something mean to the person, it's a chumrah. And it's a big one. You go to fiery hell, whatever that is. So now he's introduced another idea about a fiery hell. And we don't know what that is because that's not common Judaism. That's in Apocalypse. Yes. Sreifa, Sreifa, which in the rabbinic mode, do you want to know how it was done? It's really gruesome. No? I'll say it really quick. Anybody who doesn't want to hear it, go like this real quick. Death by burning was they poured molten lava down your throat. Okay, let's move on.
Therefore, if you are presenting
Molten
your
lead. Yeah, go ahead.
Therefore, if you are presenting your offering at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your offering there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your offering.
Okay, hang on. So now he's going to hit the temple system. Everybody knows what sacrifices are for. What is the sacrifice for? I punched my brother in the face. I said, I'm sorry. I paid the medical bill, and I brought a goat to the temple. So I'm bringing the goat to the temple. That's good, right? Should anything stop me from making atonement for that sin? Aside from saving a life? Nothing. I'm about to hand the goat to the priest, and I remember, oh, wait a minute. Oh, I also owe him $5. Right? Something that he has against me. Right? So is this that I didn't apologize yet for punching him in the face, or is this something else that I also need to make atonement for with him? This is core Judaism on Yom Kippur. It says there's sins ben adam l'makom and ben adam l'chavero. In Mishnah Yoma, this category at this time is already in place. It's in the Tosefta. It's well known at this time. You cannot get atonement from God unless you have forgiveness from the person you hurt. You have to go to the person first before you can ask God for forgiveness. So is Jesus doing something new here or not? No, this is core. This is normal. 25.
Make friends quickly with your opponent at law while you are with him on the way, so that your opponent may not hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the officer, and you be thrown into prison.
That's just good advice. Solve your problems right away before they get bigger. And then he says, 26.
Truly I say to you, you will not come out of there until you have paid up the last cent.
Okay, so again he says the I say to you, which is an interesting form of speech, but you should not be set free from prison until you've paid everything you owe. So that's again, ben adam lechavero, ben adam lechavero. He's talking about the social system of debts and laws and damages, which is a major portion of Mishnah study in the rabbinic time. So he said something wild back there on the last page, but now he's doing normal stuff again. People are getting lulled back in, very comfortable, okay? Speaking with some authority. It's a little surprising to me, but okay, let's go on. Let's do a new reader because this is a whole new topic. Yes, Jerry. Well, no, we don't really have long-term prisons. We have the authorities where you're being held while they put you under duress to pay your debts before you're either sold into slavery so that they can get some money for you, or you're killed, or you pay up and you're freed. It's not really prison. It's more like It's like the county lockup. It's not like the federal penitentiary.
Right on the pit.
All right? Okay. It's 125. Let's set this up and then we'll tackle the rabbinics on it next week. New reader, verse 27. Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't somebody with a red book? Hang on. Somebody with a red book? I want you to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 18. Deuteronomy 5:18. You'll find it on page 527. No, that's not it. That's not it. That's not it. Try Exodus 20:14. I'm looking for divorce. You got it? Deuteronomy 24:1.
What?
Deuteronomy 24:1. Sorry, 24:1.
That would be 578, 579.
Yes, 579. Who wants to read this one? Anybody who's completely okay with adultery and divorce.
Much shorter.
Now that I set it up, maybe I'll read. A man takes a wife and possesses her. She fails to please. This is in the Torah. This is our book, Deuteronomy 24. She fails to please him because he finds something obnoxious about her, and he writes her a bill of divorce. He hands it to her, sends her away from his house. She leaves his household and becomes the wife of another man. Then this later man rejects her. He writes her a bill of divorce. He hands it to her and sends her away from his house. Or the man who married her last dies. Then the first husband who divorced her shall not take her to wife again. She has since been defiled, for that would be abhorrent to God. You must not bring sin upon the land that the Lord your God has given you as a heritage. End of passage. Okay, so man marries a wife, finds something yucky about her, don't know what that means. He writes her a bill of divorce, a piece of paper, hands it to her. She is free. She goes out from his house. She's not his wife anymore. She can marry another man. He doesn't like her. He gets to divorce her too, and then she can't go back to number one. That's the rule. Everyone got it?
Yes.
From the times of Moses, divorce is okay in Judaism. Let's hear what the Sermon on the Mount does. Verse 27.
You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery.
You have heard that it was said. I'm sorry, where was it said? Okay, in Exodus, in the Ten Commandments, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not commit adultery. Good. Verse 28.
But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with his wife.
It's the Jimmy Carter standard. Right? I lusted in my heart. That is a good Christian confession, and in the text, that is a form of adultery for Jesus. We have don't covet, it's not adultery, it's coveting. That's actually the category. It's just as forbidden, we're just squabbling over which category it's in. Okay? So, yes, you're not allowed to do that. Then go on.
If your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out and hurl it from you. For it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body and for your whole body to be thrown into hell.
There's that hell again. Okay? So now he's saying, like, take the sacrifice now, as opposed to losing your entire being in the perdition and pits of hell for all time. So, you need to be strict with yourself or out there. Okay, fine. Little extreme, but I agree with his ruling on the halakha here. And he also uses this midah k'neged midah thing. You get punished the way you sin as a self-policing action. Don't wait for God to do that to you or the court. Do it to yourself first. That's the path to holiness. Now, moving on. Don't forget about the right hand. It's just the same thing. Verse 31.
It was said, whoever sends his wife away, let him give her a certificate of divorce.
Stop. It was said. Where? In the Torah, which comes from whom? God, maybe Moses. Right? So he's not saying it was written in the Torah. He's saying it has been said to you. It has been said. And then he quotes the Torah. And then what does he say?
I say to you.
Verse 32, keep going, Carol.
I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except for the reason of unchastity, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery.
Okay, so that's very different. Are you allowed to write her a bill of divorce? What about the one who had unchastity? Can you write her a bill of divorce? No, she gets executed, right? Right? You will be free of her, but not with a get. You don't have to pay any legal fees on this one, right? So he has eliminated the system of get, of writing a divorce. Okay? We're going to pick up with that hanging in the air next time. We're going to study Mishnah, where Hillel and Shammai tackle this same topic, and we're going to try and place Jesus in relationship with the schools of Hillel and Shammai, and then we're going to use that as the pattern for about another 3 or 4 things that he teaches, where he teaches the Torah and he says, but I say to you, and then we're going to read the Capernaum piece where he goes into the synagogue and teaches and sees what people's reactions are to him, and then we're going to have enough information to start to try and grapple with the Judaism of this stuff. Where's the Jewish background for his teachings, and how is it driving the plot forward? Okay? Got it? If you want to take those with you and read them, finish them before next time, you're welcome to. You can also look up in the Mishnah, Gittin chapter 9, Mishnah 10. The last Mishnah in the book of Gittin, Gittin. Yes, Elaine? Is this the basis for Jews for Jesus? I think that Judaism and Jesus are the basis for Jews for Jesus, yes. Those are the 2 texts that they're using. They combine them in a way that neither one does. Judaism doesn't, and Christianity doesn't typically, but Jews for Jesus are Christians. Anyone who accepts Jesus as Messiah